Hi, I'm Christine Dunbar from SpeechModification.com, and this is my Smart American Accent Training. We're doing our 30-day American Accent Challenge, and you've reached day 13. Today we're going to talk about past tense verbs and how you can practice your pronunciation using past tense verbs, and some important tips you need to know for common accent error patterns you might have when using these verbs. Before now, days 1 through 12, we've worked on different pronunciation and intonation topics, and you can find those videos in the playlist on my channel page. You can also find materials for each day of the accent challenge on my website, speechmodification.com. You just go into the free resources and free online practice, and you'll see all 30 days with the videos and practice materials and links to other videos to go more in depth if you have questions about some of the topics we've covered. So I'm excited to see how many of you have been there and been getting involved, been asking questions, leaving comments. It's great to see your progress. So please feel free to ask me your questions either on the website or on the videos, and I'll get back to you to make sure that this class is effective for you and you're making the changes you'd like to see in your speech. Okay, so past tense verbs. Mainly today I want to talk about regular past tense verbs where we add ed to make something past tense. However, for irregular past tense verbs, those are words that change the root part of the verb when you're making a past tense, like eat and ate, or run and ran. Those are good to practice for vowels. So frequently in a past tense verb that's irregular, the vowel will change. And it's a good opportunity to think about what is the vowel in the word and make sure you're making those two vowels distinct from each other. So let's try a few of those. Let's try get, got. And if you'd like to know what vowel is in those words, I can show you, and also I suggest watch my vowel overview video and you can take a look at the American vowels. So get and got are those two vowels. How about say and said? So that's a good way to practice those two vowels. We have come and came, give, gave, read, read. That's a good one to practice to make sure you're making those distinct from each other since they're spelled the same. See, saw, take, took, begin, began, sing, sang. So you can check those out. Another thing you can practice with past tense irregulars is the end sound. So some of them have the same vowel but a different end sound. For example, make, made, have, had. That's where you're really going to want to pay attention to what consonant you're putting on the end and the pronunciation of that. I think verbs are a great way to kind of check, do I know the vowels? Can I check in the dictionary, see what the symbol is for those vowels? So I suggest practicing that. Another thing that you can do there is to make a sentence using the present tense and the past tense. And I would suggest that for any verbs, but to make sure you're making a contrast and it's clear which verb you're saying. So for most verbs that are regular, we add the ed, the letters ed, to the end. But most of the time, ed only says one sound, rather than two sounds, like two letters. But it doesn't say the same sound. So in day 11, we talked about voiceless and voiced sounds. Take a look at that video if you haven't yet so that you understand what's coming next. But basically, for the sounds that are voiceless, those are peep, t, t, k, k, s, s, sh, sh, ch, ch. For those voiceless sounds, the ed, when it's added to the verb, will say t. I should clarify, when the verb ends with one of those voiceless sounds. So for example, when I say stop, when I add ed to stop, it sounds like stopped. It's not stopped or stopped, it's stopped. That's because when I'm saying a voiceless sound and I add another sound, it's more natural and easier to keep it voiceless. So some other examples: talk, talked, dress, dressed, watch, watched. The error pattern you need to watch out for on these types of verbs is that you may be leaving off the T, leaving off one of the other sounds because it's a consonant cluster at the end. Sometimes also people think they need to say that D, so they might say something like watched instead of watched. So those are good ones to practice. Then the next section that I suggest practicing, and this is the majority of the time, most of the time when we add ed to a verb, it says the D sound, just D. And this is true when we're adding it to a verb that ends in a vowel or in a voiced sound. And those sounds are B, B, G, V, Z, R, W, J, M, N, N, G, L, and of course, like I said, the vowels. So most of the time when you add ed to make something past tense, that is going to say a D sound. So for example, move, moved, use, used, try, tried, call, called, seem, seemed, happen, happened. What happens for most people, the accent error patterns we see on these, is that that D will be devoiced. So they might say moved instead of moved. If we have a tendency to devoice final consonants, which many people do from many different language backgrounds, then you'll be likely to devoice both. The other thing that can happen is sometimes that D sound is not there at all, so there's not a big difference between move and moved. Your word past tense might sound like the present tense if that D sound is too quiet or is missing. So those are good ones to practice for that voicing at the end. And just like any other voice consonants, when you're practicing those, it can be easier to do two words. So it might be easier to say moved it, tried it, called it, rather than just practicing on the verb by itself. Lastly, there's one other thing that ed can say at the ends of words, and that is sometimes it says id. That's because when verbs that end with T and D, we have to add another syllable. I can't say want and add a T like for the other voiceless, and I can't say need. I have to add a syllable to make a difference between need and needed, or want and wanted. Most of the time you're probably saying these correctly, except that, excuse me, you may be devoicing those Ds. So you might sound more like needed or needed rather than needed. So you want to make sure you have a voicing, your good solid voice on that ed when it says its own syllable. Like I said, for all of those voiced sounds, for verbs that end in a vowel, a voice sound, or T and D, you should practice with two words first if it's difficult to get the voicing. So you can try needed it, moved it, called it. And then the next level of practice is to try to make a sentence using both the present tense and the past tense. And that way you can test yourself to see if you know what happens for that verb. So let's try some of those. For example, I live here. I lived in Chicago before. So live and lived. I want to go there. I've wanted to go for years. So want and wanted. I stop at 5. I stopped yesterday at 6. So stop and stopped. You can choose any verb, try this out. If you're not sure what happens for the verb, use an online dictionary and look at the symbols, and you can see at the end of the word it'll be marked with a T or a D or an I-D, vowel I and D for wanted and needed. So I hope that helps you with pronunciation of past tense verbs. Of course, the reason this is important is that you want to sound, you don't want to sound like you're making a grammatical mistake when you just have a pronunciation difference. And it can be confusing to your listener if it sounds like you're using a present tense verb instead of a past tense verb. I do have practice materials for you on this with some recordings of very common verbs, and with that information I gave you about which thing happens, which ones are voiced and voiceless, since I know that's a lot to take in when you're listening. So go to my website, speechmodification.com, to check that out. And join me tomorrow for day 14 of our American Accent Challenge. If you have more questions and comments, please leave them on the video or send me a message. I was happy to see you here today, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Christine Dunbar from Speech Modification signing off. Remember, if you want to sound American, you can do it. SpeechModification.com.